Does the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau think the average Canadian is insane? Do they think we're stupid? That we believe that they're going to build 3.87 million new homes by 2031? Or even according to CMHC's 3.5 million new homes by 2030? The numbers just don't compute. And not only do the numbers don't make sense based on the current situation, I mean economically and obviously on the development side, but what are they actually saying? What is the government, what is the Housing Minister Sean Fraser saying to Canadians, or what should Canadians be understanding about the plan? Is it going to happen overnight? Are we going to see home prices change instantaneously? The answer is pretty much no. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. I'll clip to an interesting interview with Sean Fraser that I think really highlight what we should be paying close attention to as Canadians who are anticipating that this huge influx of inventory that is created by the government is really going to change prices here in Canada. Now, I'm not sitting here and saying that home prices are not going to change, and I'm not going to sit here and say that economically, if conditions in Canada worsen, that we're going to see a little bit more distressed sales. We're going to see a couple more foreclosures. Those numbers are unfortunately ticking up, and the majority of these Canadians that are going through this process to go through the power of sale where they have to sell their home is because they are with private mortgages. We do not see many banks, the top 5, actually pushing through power sales. Yes, they're there, but not at the same level that we're seeing on the private side or with these mortgage investment companies. So I think there's a clear distinction there, first and foremost, because some will argue, yeah, we're going to see inventory come from all these Canadians that can't afford their homes. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, there still is a very low default percentage in Canada, even considering the economic conditions. Now, speaking of the economic conditions, Canada is definitely facing some major problems when it comes to growth, right? We have now missed the target. Stats Canada is going to look at revisiting some of these numbers, and that's going to put some pressure on the Bank of Canada to maybe have to cut interest rates in June or July. I mean, the writing is on the wall. We have unemployment ticking up. We have the lack of skilled trades. I mean, this is the crux of the argument. I mean, ultimately, we should not go it should be noticed that if you're talking to anyone who's in the trades, you're talking to anyone who's a developer, builder, that you're going to hear the same thing. They can't find employees, or they're having problems negotiating those wages, because wages are a huge part of working. Nobody wants to work for free. Everyone wants their fair share of what they're entitled to earn. And this is where the disconnect with a lot of developers is happening with these union negotiations. So talking a little bit about the developers and why it's important to understand the conversation of how do we build 3.8 million new homes when developers are basically disappearing, whether it be home builders and developers and condo builders. We're starting to see some of the writing on the wall. So if we look at developers, you might say, Ant, I'm driving around areas and I see townhomes and condo projects being built and I see cranes in the sky. Yeah, that's 100% correct. But those projects were initiated a long time ago. Those projects were penciled in probably 5 years ago. The permit was issued. They had no choice but to build that property or that development site because permits have a shelf life. Developers are starting to realize, hey, I don't have the trades. I don't have the material. I don't have the benefit of low interest rates when carrying these mortgage costs. Just like a Canadian who carries a mortgage, developers have costs that they need to carry. And in most cases, believe it or not, they don't get preferred pricing unless they're building purpose-built rentals, where at CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, gives them very beneficial rates, longer amortizations, and 95% funding. But that is not units that are desired for end users, those who actually want to move into those units. I mean, ultimately, if you have a home buyer that wants to buy a home, well, now you have to fight with the inventory levels and you have to fight with developers. This is why I believe that developers were fighting for this 30-year amortization, is to try and get first-time home buyers that want to buy new construction homes to the market, because ultimately investors are gone. If investors leave the pre-construction condo market, which is the most popular for investors, then what does that leave the builder with? They can't meet their criteria, their quota to sell 75 to 80% or whatever percentage that they need to get their financing from their banks. If they don't meet that threshold, that project gets put back on the shelf until they can. And we see this happening because now developers are trying to entice buyers to come to the market with maybe favorable mortgage options that they're providing. Or maybe they're providing them with cars or additional discounts or more upgrades, Whatever the case is, the incentives are being thrown out there. So if you're an individual that is looking at an opportunity right now to buy a pre-construction unit and you can afford it and you qualify, well, take advantage of those incentives. I mean, that's probably a really good opportunity. But you have to think about all the process. Developers right now are still paying an exorbitant amount of tax, and obviously the cost, the bureaucracy to permits and all these architectural designs, everything that goes into it. A huge percentage of these developments charged or being charged by the government a huge amount. And that is something that, yeah, the government wants to pull back on. But as we mentioned on the channel before on numerous occasions, this is a big problem, because if a municipality like Toronto loses billions of dollars in revenue from these developments, whether it be today or tomorrow, because remember, they're going to lose it anyway if developers aren't coming to the table, but where are they going to make that money back? And that means property taxes go up for individuals. So we have to understand that the market right now, we've seen the lowest amount of housing starts in recorded history that I can remember. I mean, if you look at this chart, you'll see we are so far behind. And even if we take an opportunity to look and say, hey, what are some of the best years that Canada's done in building? And ultimately that was, what, in 2021, when interest rates were at historic lows and buyers were lined up around the corner to put their money on the table for a new construction home, or even lined up at open houses to pay more, or multiple offers to pay more for a home. I mean, that was the environment at that time. So sure, builders are seeing their pockets being lined full of cash because they could sell it to investors, they can sell it to buyers. But now the market has shifted. We don't have the same environment. And this is where the Bank of Canada is basically going to the government saying, hey, we need to bring more inventory to the market. Now, speaking of inventory, this is where we turn to our housing minister, the person that's supposed to be in charge of managing where we are. Now, ultimately, there was a little shift here between Mark Miller and Sean Fraser, but I mean, ultimately, the government has the task to monitor immigration levels and housing starts and their expectations for their election promises. If you're promising Canadians, young Canadians that voted for you, to start to build more affordable homes, what took you so long? Right? Why is this taking so long for you to do? Why are you doing it within an arm's reach of now 2025, an election year? Are you trying to buy voters? Are you trying to say, hey, we're deflecting right now, we're deflecting, and that's what we sort of hear. It's their fault, it's investors, it's the wealthy, it's not the government, right? The government has no hand to play in this. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Let me know what you think. But ultimately, I think this is the problem right now. And even if the government had built even a fraction more and really pushed that inventory level up, we wouldn't be facing the major problems that we see today. Even though we have immigration concerns, ultimately, you know, we've pulled back on some of these temporary workers, we've pulled back on students and all this other stuff, but there's still going to be permanent residents that arrive here in Canada, and the expectation is that they're going to have shelter. They're going to have a place to live. They're not finding it. We have tent cities popping up all over the place. We have students living in their cars, people renting out parking spots on their driveway. This is absolutely crazy, and this is the conversations that we're having with individuals. They're coming to us expressing their disheartened, they're just deflated. And ultimately, there are few that can qualify. There are many that can't. And a lot of it has to do with wages. So I'm getting off on a tangent here. I want to take a second clip to what Sean Fraser had to say just a few weeks before the budget was released. Here it is.
You also mentioned, Minister, that speed is paramount. And it's in that vein I kind of wanted to ask about the bigger picture as Canadians are staring down housing prices, which year over year in February are up from an average of $662,000 to $685,000. You've made a succession of announcements to speed up the development of housing. I think the Prime Minister said today, in total, 750,000 fast-tracked units over the next 10 years. When will that start to impact affordability? When will homes become more affordable for Canadians based on the actions you've taken so far?
But until we grow the supply beyond where the demand currently exists, we're going to continue to see pricing pressures that can impact the cost of living for people. And we want to continue to do as much as we can until we get to that equilibrium that will actually put an even level of pressure, even a downward pressure on prices for people who are trying to find a place to live. There's no silver bullet. The measures we've introduced are already starting to have an impact. Some of them will take a few years to reach maturity, but that's no excuse to delay beginning with them. And we're getting everything done as quickly as we can to help bring the cost down for people trying to find a place to live.
And surely the officials in your department are crunching the numbers. When you're making these specific announcements about specific numbers, you know the CMHC has said 3.5 million homes by 2030 to restore affordability. You're not even a third of the way there. And that is adding another 4 years. Is it fair to tell Canadians realistically the increases that you're driving in supply will not affect affordability for a decade or so?
It'll depend on the individual market, but keep in mind the CMHC numbers contemplate achieving a level of affordability that hasn't existed for more than 2 decades now.
So what level of affordability does your government want to achieve?
And I think that's a reasonable goal, because you start to see a change, and you look a little bit more recently, sort of 2008, 2009, where Canada was separated from the rest of the pack internationally. But everything we do until we reach that level of affordability is going to bring us closer to that level of affordability. It's not as though we wake up one morning and home prices are suddenly radically different. Over time, compared to a person's incomes, we hope to achieve a level of whether it's rent or purchase price that people can afford. So as wages continue to go up over time, and we can place a downward pressure by addressing the supply gap issue and certainly addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, we believe that it will get progressively better until we achieve that level of affordability. But certainly, I think it's a reasonable goal to have, to restore a level of affordability that existed when Canada separated from the pack globally, or perhaps even earlier when homes may have been more affordable still.
So as you can see, within this conversation, he's being asked about where they see affordability, going. And they sort of, beating around the bush. They're sort of walking around the conversation. They're not going to come out and say, we want home prices to come down, because that would be political suicide. They won't come out and say that. I don't think there's one politician that actually came out and said, we're gunning for home prices to come down. They're conversating around fixing the housing problem, bringing in more affordable homes, bringing in more inventory. They're not going to come out and say, we want home prices to come down. Now, behind the scenes, ultimately, that's maybe their goal, right? Affordability. What is affordability? How much money of your take-home pay, how much money are you spending per month out of what you earn that goes towards either covering your rent or your mortgage? And if we return to CMHC's guidelines, which is around 30 or 33%, most Canadians can't even afford the homes that they're living in at that percentage or that ratio. So ultimately, we have to understand that wages need to go up, right? This is what Sean Fraser is saying. He's saying if we sort of look at growing the inventory over time and bringing in all these measures, but at the same time we're increasing wages, then we should restore affordability and more Canadians can afford homes. I mean, think about that for a second. He's saying that wages need to go up and not home prices need to come down. He's saying we need to introduce more inventory, stabilize home prices, right, to avoid them from going up even more significantly, like the run-ups that we saw over the past. End of the day, they're talking about trying to bring more inventory and having wages increase. But if we think about wages and increasing in this environment right now, what has the Bank of Canada told us? The Bank of Canada is saying, hey, we're monitoring wage growth because that's inflationary. So it's like we're stuck in this position right now where we want Canadians to earn more money so that they can afford their day-to-day lives, not even their mortgages and their rent. I mean, just their day-to-day lives. More and more of their money is going towards covering interest and covering carbon taxes and covering all these other things. Now you want to add in saying, hey, wages need to come up. Yes, a lot of wages did go up for a lot of individuals, especially those that are unionized, those that are in the government sector. We saw huge run up in employment in the government. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I really have to call out the government and say, I think they're pretty much out to lunch if they think that they're going to be building anywhere close to 3.8 million new homes. Just do the simple math. If we take, even at the best year, 300,000 homes times the next 7 years, they would have to build 500,000 new homes per year. They can't even build that many homes right now. So we're already behind the 8 ball. Let us know what you think. You think it's possible to build 3.8 million new homes? Is this just a joke? Do they think that Canadians are really that stupid to believe that the government can actually fulfill this project and actually deliver on this? Let us know what you think in the comment section below, but we'll leave the video here. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.